Welcome back, everybody. So now that you've seen the layout, and before we run it, now you know what to expect when we run it. We're going to run it after we go through the code one more time because it's going to clarify exactly what's going to happen. So I'm going back to the code that I have stored here on the GitHub because it's nice and clear. It's nice to read. And so let's walk through the code. So the first thing that happens is we initialize a game grid variable, which happens to be a two-dimensional array, which builds your tic-tac-toe grid. It's a 3x3 array, okay? And a few other variables that will become apparent as we go through the code. New game button, message text view, for text view, turn, message, game over, game string. Then as we begin, we associate each of the game buttons, square 1, square 2, square 3, all the way to square 9 with the game grid two-dimensional array. So at the very beginning, we're going to set some event handlers. So we're going to set onClick listeners, okay? And there's going to be an onClick listener set up and associated with each of these variables in your array. There's also going to be a new game button. So we're going to have a set onClick listener. So we're going to be listening because right below, as you can see, looking up ahead, we're going to be doing an onClick. And when a click happens, because we set up these onClick listeners, when this onClick happens, then we're going to be checking on what was clicked on. And also, we will initialize on that grid. Those are buttons that are objects. And the objects have various attributes. One of them is text. We're going to have this text equal blank. So we're going to initialize everything. The first turn, turn number 1, the game is not over at the beginning. Player X's turn, we're going to start with X, and we're going to send that as a message, and it's going to say player X's turn. That's the message going out, and the game string is going to be blank. So now we're going to listen to the button. We're listening, we're listening, we're listening. If somebody clicked on the new game button, we initialize everything all over again, just like we did above. But that's normally not going to be the case. It's going to be somebody clicking, the user, the player, clicking on one of the buttons in the array, in the 3x3 array of the tic-tac-toe game. And at the beginning, the game is not over, right? And it's not going to be over unless we reach the count where the game is over. So at the very beginning, it comes here and says the game is not over. So somebody clicked. It's not the new game button. The game is not over. So let's get the button that was clicked on. And so, and that button is going to be B. From now on, we're just going to call it B. And so we're going to get the text. If the text is blank, that means that it was clicked on a button that had not been clicked on before. Then we're going to insert the text that we have, whether it's going to be an X or a 0. But before I explain this part right here, if the text had already been clicked, which means it's not blank, then the if statement will jump over here and will set the message to, hey, that square is taken, try again. Okay, because you're not allowed to click on the button that had already been clicked on, that already had an X or an O. That's what this part is, okay? Pretty clever, right? So far, so good. So now let's find out what message we're going to send out to that button. We're going to set it up with either an X or an O. So if it is an X, that is if it's an odd turn. And right now it is an odd turn because it's the first turn. So the modulus 2 is really checking whether it's odd or even. And you can look it up on your own, and you've done a lot of code before this class. And you know that you use the modulus with the percent sign in the case of Java to check of whether a number is even or odd. That means if it's divisible by 2 or not. So 1 is not divisible by 2, so it's false. You have a remainder. 1 over 2 is 0.5. There is a remainder over there. And then we're going to set text to X, which is true. I mean, that is what it should be right at the beginning, not to O. If it was the next turn, say the turn was turn number 2 or 4, if it was number 2, then the modulus of 2 over 2 is 1.0, there is no remainder. So in that case, it is a 0, the remitter, so it doesn't come to the X, it comes to the O, and you set the message that it was player X. So we send that message out, and you say, now it's going to be player X's turn, because the one that was just clicked on was an O. You set the O on the square, and now you say, okay, the O is there, now it's your turn, X. At the beginning, right, you set the X on the square, and now you say it's O's turn. So this is how you're going turn by turn by turn. But we're going to check in right here if the game is over. And the game can be over if somebody wins, right? And somebody can match on the rows. And we go through these 4 loops. And we're looping around from 0 to 2. X below 3 is 0 to 2. And as you can see, the grids go from 0 to 2. We begin with 0 and 2. The rows on the left, the columns on the right. So the first thing we check is we go through a for loop and checking all the rows. So we go through the loop checking that we have a match between the row between 0 and 2 of the 0, and then the 1. Does it match the next one, the next row? It's just checking the next row. We also check that there was no blank. Okay, so that is not blank. But the main idea here is in these 2 rows where we check if there is a match. If there is a match, we get the text that had been set. In the case at the beginning is X. If it's the next turn number 2 or 4, that would be an O, for example. And then we set the message to that text, X or O, wins. And then we say the game is over. And it's the same logic for checking on the columns, except in the columns, the for loop is going to be looping on the column variable, the second one. All right. Then we check the diagonals. The diagonals are a little bit more tricky. So we're hard-coded 0, 0 against 1, 1, and 1, 1 against 2, 2. And that's how we're checking a diagonal. Okay. And then the other diagonal, one from left to right, and the other one from right to left going down. So there's your diagonals. The other possibility for the game to be over is if the turn is number 9, then it is a tie. In that game, you also set the game over to true. In all of these cases, because the game is over, you're going to check the game over to true, so that when you come back here, you're going to check for game over. Otherwise, if none of these conditions happen, the game over remains false. And that is how you play the game. That's how you play the game. So when you see it running, this is all going to make even more sense. And I also going to ask you to come back to the code here on GitHub or on your Android Studio and revise it on your own. Spend a little time on your own by yourselves, maybe re-listening to my recording. And if I misspoke anything, let me know. I try to not to do that. We cover this in about 8 minutes, which is good, right? So come back and review this code on your own. I didn't explain every single line, but there are plenty of comments. And then if you scroll down further, you see there is some documentation here that will help you reason through. Because now we're doing something that is manipulating your buttons, changing the text, checking the status of the button, checking the status of the entire activity to play a game. So this user interface is quite sophisticated, and I want you to master it. I want you to really understand it. So from in the next now we're going to be running it, right? So I wanted to come back and cover the code one more time. I think it was well deserved. Also in the code and the explanation of the lab in Canvas, you will also get further explanation and further ideas that you can take from the Canvas shell. That is not explained by me, but you will get more information there. So do both and spend a little time, spend a good half hour just reasoning through this and think of the possibilities. If you didn't do a tic-tac-toe game, but if you do something else, maybe you can do a wheel of fortune, or you can do, I don't know. I mean, there's so many things you can do. But these ideas of checking the text, checking the status, checking if the game is over, updating texts, keeping up with status of the texts on each of the buttons, like we did here, checking on the diagonals and see what text each of the diagonals have, what's an X, and are they equal across rows and columns and diagonals. It's quite amazing. So you can use this as a template for other things completely different, but based on the same ideas. All right. So great. Now we can run the code, and you'll get more out of it. Talk to you later. Take care.